Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Neutrality Studies. My name is Pascal Lotta. I'm an associate professor at Kyoto University, and today I'm joined again by our great young colleague, Nell Bonilla. She has a fantastic Substack called Worldliness, and in her Substack, she then writes about issues of global affairs. And her greatest gift is that she is able to really take a bird's eye perspective on current affairs, how the elites currently are interlinking with each other, and what this also leads to in mass psychological terms. At least those are some of the topics that are being explored. Her latest article is really worth a read, should be read by everybody, called Munich in the Bunker, the Munich Security Conference 2026 and the Simulation of European Sovereignty. So this is what we want to talk about today. Nell, welcome back.
I'm glad to be here again.
Thank you. And I just had to load your article, which I forgot to load at first, but luckily we saw it. You wrote this about, obviously, the Munich Security Conference, and I had a couple of talks on my channel now about this. And, you know, we all circle back to colonialism because obviously Marco Rubio, but you are connecting it with your theory of the bunker state. Can you maybe first, for the people who haven't heard of the bunker state, first outline very broadly what you mean with that concept and then how it ties in with Munich, please?
Yes, of course. So I'm currently developing like a theoretical framework. I'm calling it the bunker state. And what I mean by the bunker state is that the, let's say, Western or European transatlantic planning within states, countries has changed in the last, let's say, 20, almost 30 years, maybe, 20 years. In the sense that before we had, we always had planning in such countries, planning in the sense of planning for the common good, for social welfare, for better urban spaces, green spaces. So planning for improving quality of life of citizens. I'm not saying that it was always perfect and so on and so forth, but it existed. There was like, let's say, democracy in the traditional sense had more weight. So there was more permeability between also working classes and elites and so forth. Now, what I would say qualitative change so far, which I'm calling the bunker state, is that these normal avenues of democracy, like voting, are not anymore influencing so much planning for improving life, which I guess most people want, but rather there was a change where now other parts of society, let's say I call securitocracy, like these military planners, think tanks, military contractors, and so on, have like more weight in this, much more weight. So they create such plans on a national, but also on regional levels and so on. Through NATO, I would say is like a prime key actor here. And then their goal is not anymore improving the quality of life of the citizens of this or that country, but instead it's about um, rather militarizing the society, territory, resources. This is why there's also this talk of dual use, infrastructure, and so on. And that's why it's also like we feel like if we go and vote and so on, there's not anymore this influence we have on improving our lives or changing anything. Instead, we see more militarization, more talk about so-called security and defense and deterrence and so on. So that is the qualitative shift, or that's are some parts of it that I try to describe with this bunker state framework, in the sense that there is a planning for the Western elite, let's call them, to not lose their status as hegemon, as the unipolar power, specifically on a US-led basis, but it's a transatlantic elite. And so how does now the Munich Security Conference tie into this, or how do I read it? So in my essay, Munich in the Bunker, I didn't just look at Marco Rubio's speech, but also at like really different panels, and tried to see, okay, what is going on here. And what I found, like we could say, as a summary, is that not what many say, that like there's this split between Europeans and the US, that the US wants to go away, leave NATO, kind of, and that the Europeans, they don't want the US to leave, and so on. Uh, I mean, one could think of this like that if you see the Munich Security Conference and so on in a very uh, surface level manner. But if one looks at the whole from start to beginning with the documents and all, then we almost see like a narrative that instead of like this split, there is more like a narrative of we as Europeans and the US are actually working together, or let's say the allies, NATO and the US, are working together to create plans for more securitization, more deterrence, more militarization. So, in effect, the Munich Security Conference is more like what I call a ritual of synchronization. So, what is there to do for whom? Who will do what in this stage? In this, what role does everybody have? So, and I also argue that the European part specifically, but maybe other allies too, are actually integrating more. I mean, if they haven't been integrating enough, they are integrating now more into US military structures, command structures, but also the industrial base, and so on, and maybe even in a political manner. So this is like the key argument. So it's a continuation of this implementation of securitizing allied or NATO societies more and more. So in order to halt, stop, or even destroy multipolar development, or what one sees as yeah.
Hey, very brief intermission because I was recently banned from YouTube, and although I'm back, this can happen anytime again. So please consider subscribing not only here, but to my mailing list on Substack. That's pascalotta.substack.com. The link's going to be in the description below, and now back to the video. Yeah, I mean, this is you're pointing out something very, very important again, that we might be misreading, or we might be missing the forest for the trees. Because yes, okay, Marco Rubio said this very colonial did this very colonial speech, and yes, you can read this as a way of going back to the old days, but in a sense, they're doing something new, or they continue what they've been working on, which is dividing the world, and through this ritual, just figuring out who does what in the team play, and the team play isn't going away at all. And actually, a good part of Rubio's speech was actually about reassuring the Europeans, and maybe that's not even necessary, right? It's kind of a matter of course that you continue within these elite circles on the path that you're already on, and it's not new people that came in. It's not Jeremy Corbyn that delivered a stunning kind of reversal of British politics. No, it's what is his name, Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, is very much well, an apparatchik of the of the system in North America, in Canada, right? So why would we even expect that something large is going to change? In your bunker framework, then, do you what do you think was the importance of Munich? Was there a difference from previous Munich security conferences? Is something genuinely new, or is it actually really? I mean, just a continuation of what had been going on for the last 20 years.
Yeah. So I would say there is something new in the sense that, I mean, in a way, there are many things, many factors, many things that are not new, but are rather radicalization, one could say, an intensification of what has already happened. So, on the one hand, there is, for example, this idea of burden sharing or burden shifting that was like more openly talked about at the Munich Security Conference. So this is again, this is not something new, not a new concept. It is something that is researched even within the US, its government, think tanks, and so on, where they think about, okay, how can we best coerce and persuade our allies to share the burden for having like more using their own territories as the forward bases and so on for potential military conflicts. So this was new in the sense that it was totally out in the open. In fact, there was a kick-off meeting event in Berlin, so not in Munich, but it was tied to the Munich Security Conference. There was the NATO ambassador who was called Whitaker, and he said like and I was really surprised that nobody at all anywhere picked it up. He said, we still love you, you're still allies, but we want you to grow and become what you can become. Autonomy, we're not asking for European autonomy, we're asking for European strengths. We just expect you to do more and not be independent. And then I think that's the problem. Just because you're strong doesn't mean you're independent. In fact, the interconnectedness is more important. So this is something he said in this kickoff event. Yes.
He literally said, we don't want you to be independent. It's
Yes,
like,
yes.
it shouldn't go that far, guys. Let's not overdo it here. Wow, you're right.
Yes.
They should have been picked up.
Yes, I'm like, why? So, and I linked it in my essay so everybody can listen to it and see it. And he actually says, we don't want you to be independent, we want you to be strong. And interconnectedness is more important. So what is he saying? He's saying what it's there it is. And I think no, that's from Ischinger.
Strong but not independent.
Yes.
Oh my
So
god.
there. And it's really like, how can this be? But anyway, the point is he said it out loud in an event that nobody picked up. Actually, there were some media outlets that talked about the kickoff event, but nobody quoted this part. Well, anyway, so what is this part saying? Something that, again, is not new. They are saying they want Europe, not only the European Union, but Europe as a whole, to become strong in what sense? Military sense, in the military sense. And not independent, which means that they integrate themselves, that they follow the lead of the US elites in a way. So that is the aim. And they say that in the open. And not only that, they also, for example, with this talk of burden sharing, invited also Albert Colby, who is like a leading figure in this always, how do you say, publishing papers about burden sharing and so on. And I mean, he was less direct. He rather said, I mean, he also said stuff where I was like, why doesn't anybody talk about this? Like, the US will be everywhere, kind of something like that, he said. And but we need buffers of assurance territorially so that we can concentrate, in his case, or in the US case, they want to concentrate in what they call Indo-Pacific, so China. And I would say that this is the qualitative shift in essence, that they became very direct, even with the Marco Rubio speech itself. It was absolutely direct about, in essence, what I call, like, you could say it's an ideology, or I call it meta framework, but it's like this underlying assumptions, not only like from today, from the transatlantic or functional elites of today, but like in undercurrent that this has historical roots, which I say come from actually the transition from feudalism to capitalism is where it took root, and it became like this ideology that justifies carrying out violence to the elites themselves. They can justify it to themselves and to others. But here it became like direct again. So I think the qualitative shift is here also on the part of the Europeans that were there. While you saw like many apparent disagreements between them. Like here were the conservatives, nationalists, they were the very liberal types and so on. And it's like, oh no, you cannot say they barbarians. I don't know, stuff like that, or saying, oh no, we cannot carry out this policy, but like minor disagreements. After all, they all still convened or still converged on the point of Russia is a threat, China is a strategic competitor. What else? Oh, we need to do more for NATO, become more resilient, stronger. So they all, at the end, even the Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, I think. Yeah. Even she said like, let's become stronger with NATO, basically. And even other Europeans said, oh, this thing about Greenland, oh, well, I mean, we should be grateful. It was like a wake-up call. The US is actually right. We need to become stronger, but not independent. So I think this is the qualitatively, like the new thing is this directness, this openness, because in actuality, many of these things, many of these policies, many of these ideas and so on come actually from the, I would say, post-Cold War period, like in the 1990s. If you look at papers from NATO and research papers, they all talk, well, not all, but many talk about burden sharing. Many talk about Russia as a threat. Even back then, and we cannot integrate it, and even Europe cannot become independent. It needs to be under US-led NATO and so forth. So all of this already existed in the 1990s, but here it is now absolutely open, in the open end for everybody to hear and see. So that's the change.
Yeah, so even to a good extent, from the European part, the submissiveness, as in, yes, you're right. I mean, we are the problem, and on the US part, actually, the this kind of clear outright dominance. So really establishing also the order within which then the marching should take place. Why is it in your framework, in this bunker state, that Russia is necessarily, and China seem to be necessarily, the other part to this system? Why is it that there's no integration with them among these elite circles? And maybe hand in hand with that, how do you interpret the revelations of these Epstein files? You know, the way that we saw that these elite circles really have very deep ties with each other, but also do try to gain compromise about each other, spy on each other. But at the end of the day, somehow it works together as a system. Like just the lockstep seems to be working. And as you said, there are minor differences in the approach that these individuals want to take, but it's a little bit like the squibble over who's captain of the boat, while it is utterly clear what the course of the boat is, right? It's clear, the destination seems to be clear, even if like this one wants to do a little bit of this and the other one a little bit of that, but the course seems to be clear within the epistemic bubble. How do you see that?
So I would say that, so for your first question, Russia, China, why is that? Well, I think we could go back again, back in time in history, like with this transition of feudalism to capitalism. And what I argue is that what happened there was like an elite that had the technological advancement in military matters and so on, was able to impose capitalistic social structures. And for that, they used what I call a dichotomous framework, like one that differentiates between black, white, barbarian, civilized, and so on and so forth. And they used this to justify, again, violence for themselves, violence that they use, and also for those they are trying to oppress, let's say, exploit, and so on. So there was like this first usage of it. So this is why I also make this argument or this focus on elites itself, because many will maybe say, oh, it's about the West, or it's about US and Europe. So that these frameworks, these cognitive frameworks, that they are so different.
Geographical frameworks mostly, yeah.
But in what I'm observing rather is that it is like more like a framework, let's say a cognitive framework that a specific social group has used over and over again, that has carried itself with it because it was successful through the development of capitalism until today.
Hmm.
So that's one thing, and that's in such a framework where the West, let's say, or the European coded West is and elite European coded West is at the top. This means that other countries that are not part of this are the enemy, specifically if they don't try to. I mean, if they try to contest, if they try to, contest this exploitation and so on. So in the case of now what we call multipolar development, in my essay, I said there was like a multipolar shock in 2014 or such. But the multipolar shock was not so much about just that Russia and China developed in an industrial way or elevated the standards of quality of life of their citizens and so on. Like, this was not the shock because, again, since the end of the Cold War, there was already from the get-go this talk that Russia can't be integrated into NATO or the European Union, can't be a part of or an integral part of OSCE and so on, because this would mean that Europe could then maybe work with Russia, and then there would be another like a sphere of influence, let's call it, that is not the US and that is not led by the US. And why? Because, and they say it openly, because Russia is such territorially big country with so many resources. You cannot expect to be able basically to subjugate it, to oppress it, to have it. It will always have these, and also because of the Soviet Union, and so it also had like the knowledge resources technologically and so on. You just cannot, even if you want to, subjugate it, use it for your gains. This is what like in NATO and US papers of the 1990s one can read. So, and China in a similar way, just too big. You cannot oppress it. So Russia and China in the 2010s and so forth, the US then saw, oh, okay, they are now also developing militarily, industrially, and so on. Now we really have a problem. So, like, this is the
Yeah.
one thing I would say.
Sorry, so just you cannot have real partners within the alliance. You cannot have real partners, like equal partners within this system, because the system is built upon hierarchy, right? And the top dog doesn't look for partners; it looks for well, implementation aids, satellites, or whatever we want to call them, and so you have to other them. That's the only way to deal with them, and then ultimately fight and defeat them, and then figure out what you do with the rest. The way that once Yugoslavia was broken up, the leftovers were very much manageable for the alliance, right? Is that how we should understand it?
Yeah. I would say yes, absolutely, because again, yes, it was about this, or it is about still this idea of we want, even if they don't say it out loud. I mean, kind of in the Marco Rubio speech that I want to again dominate the world. Here they say, oh, let's do it with Europe, but I mean the core idea is always like having this US-led system. So yes, it is about like making these countries more smaller, so that one can manage them. So and yes, then you have to other them, because there's no other way. I mean, there's no other way to militarize your own society, so that they will, in a potential military conflict, say, oh, okay, this is the enemy, you need to do that. And again, it's also for their own peace of minds themselves, so they also need a script for that.
Sorry, I just need to ask, like, this approach to international affairs is something that I most closely connect with the term neoconservatism, the neocons. But you're actually you're you're going further, right? You're saying we have to look for the origins of this in the transition between a feudalism to a capitalism. Why is that? Why should we search the origins of the neocons there?
Well, it's not only of the neocons, but well, one could say yes. But why would we want to search there? Because I mean, we need to understand. Okay, if we just look at U.S. policy since its inception, actually, since its inception, it started as a capitalist country, as a country not only capitalist but also from the get-go with a lot of violence, so
Yes.
genocide and slavery and genocide and settler colonialism and all of it. So it started from the get-go with such practices and also which also means with such a mindset they needed to have a specific mindset to constitute themselves as such as a state like that. And I mean with they again, not like everybody, but the US elites, like their project they constitute.
The political structure, the political project of the United States, right? What happened and how this plot of land and this group of people then governed itself and others and integrated the others that didn't want to go along with it, well, including the slaves, obviously, right? And that then creates an economic and social system. So, but that's already a step too far, right? Because you said we need to look at the transition from feudalism to capitalism, which actually is actually pre
Yeah.
17 what was it 1786, right?
Yeah. So of course, because this is also important because then this is why I say this argument Europe US is not so good. Because yes, it started with the transition, transition from feudalism to capitalism. We had, of course, to structure societies or restructure societies in such a way that they don't produce and work and live anymore like they did before, but in a totally new way. Or in this case, in this process, it was all immersed in violence too. So, which meant there was violence too against peasants and enclosures and common goods, etc., that did exist in feudalism. Kind of, there were also the witch hunts, which is also a topic like women, like as a sort of symbol of these structures, the social structures that are more about cooperation rather than domination. And so this is here where it starts in medieval times in Europe, and then with colonialism, this mindset is still taken further. They find new people to exploit because again they had all apart from a different religion and culture, or let's say the culture, the social structures of these societies were also different, and so they needed to what they did is they destroyed or tried to destroy these cultures and religions and way of life too. So this meant they needed to impose a new narrative, and the new narrative in this case was based on religion. But that is not the point. The point is that this narrative about religion was about, okay, these are maybe not humans, don't have a soul, and here we have the humans who have a soul. We have the right to do this. We can exploit and so on. So this is why I say that these mental frameworks originate in this transition from feudalism to capitalism, because there is where they were born. There was also where they had maybe less, one could say, contestation, less resistance, not because there was no resistance, but because the technological development in terms of warfare and armament and so on was already beginning there, and specifically in the case of colonialism, the others didn't have the type of weapons and so on. Not to mention, of course, the whole issue of illnesses and so. So this is why I say here the origins, and then with colonialism came, of course, the the settlers and so on. And then the US was also consolidated, but it consolidated itself with this mindset in a almost pure form. But again, it's all also one could say like an inheritance of European history. So, and it carries itself until today. Because why? Because we're still in capitalism. And not only that, there are still transitions, there are still points or historical processes where we have contestation to this type of organization of societies. So with this talk about multipolarity, we could say, well, these other societies, other countries like China, for example, but others too, try to structure society in such a way that it is not only about profits and so on, capital, but a bit more about the social good, social welfare. And so this is where I'm going with this.
No, you're. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we see such examples every once in a while from China, right? That is willing to crush an entire industry, like their gaming industry, when they decide that this is not socially desirable, that we have so many young people addicted to games, so we do something about it, right? And people are just a little bit flabbergasted. Also, how they intervened in the housing market, and in the West, this is then often interpreted as emergency signs and the imminent collapse, but it turns out to be completely utterly wrong. So we don't even need to go there. So do you then view the contest that the how should we call them, the bunker state people, that they are getting into? Is it a civilizational thing? Is it like this Euro-American civilizational conglomerate that is now gearing up again for a fight against these other civilizational projects, the Russians, the Chinese, the Persians? I mean, as we speak on this February the 27th, the war, I mean, the fighting hasn't started yet, although you have a very important argument, actually, which we also could talk about. The war is already, but we could talk about that. Is it a civilizational contest that as which we should understand it?
Yeah. I wouldn't, no. I mean, I wouldn't say so, because in my view, like so civilizations, I mean, they are a very fragile and dynamic concept or structure. And again, US American civilization, I wouldn't say that this is what is right now happening, like this militarization and so on. Because in effect, the only reason why in this whole historical process so much violence is needed or was needed and apparently still is used is because there's always resistance to it, including within the US, including within the European territories themselves. There is resistance to it, and there has always been. I mean, we just need to think about the origins of socialism, communism,
Right.
as concepts, like of concepts of ultimate cooperation, one could say. So there were always other models, other alternatives. Even in the times of colonization, there were people there in these times themselves that said, no, that what we are doing here is wrong. We need to not murder everybody. We need to actually talk and live with them. So there were always different types, one could say modernities, different types of models for society, even in what we call the West or US, Euro civilization or whatever. So this is why I say a contest between civilizations. I would say not necessarily. Rather, this is an elite or ruling strata project. Yes, from the West, from US and Europe, and it has won, unfortunately. But it doesn't mean that this is what the West, what Europe, or what the US is. In the case of the other parts of the world, well, or I would argue that here it is indeed that they have a long history and maybe have not, or have kind of were able to resist colonization, or were never colonized, and so on. So they have a history of different modes of thinking, modes of organizing society. And they have still this memory, and they use it for, even today, for organizing their societies. And again, in the case of US and Europe, it's more like this project specifically since the US superseded or almost enveloped what there is of alternative projects within the West, or tries to crush them even today. It still happens. So that's why I would say it's not like clash of civilizations or anything like that. Or no, it's rather a specific project from ruling strata, yes, coming from a specifically historical point process, and it's still ongoing. And we are now here and thinking about what can we do so that it doesn't turn into chaos and more violence.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're doing. I mean, and we're still, despite everything and all the years of analysis, we're still just trying to scratch the surface of trying to understand what exactly is the process that's happening. Which is why I think your analysis is so good, because you're using a very proper framework to understand not just the particular, but the arch of what we are likely maybe in. Um, you know, one of the people the two people that I admire very much here on YouTube are Alex Christoforou and Alexander Mercouris, because they provide, in my view, very valuable daily news updates. And one of their contestations is, that this group of people, and I think we speak largely about the same one. Some call them neocons, some, like you, have a broader definition. The two keep saying, like, they have no reverse gear. They never they never go back. They always double down. Whenever something fails, whenever they hit a brick wall, they just try to hit it again slightly differently, even when it looks as if though they're going back. One of the examples that, then, by the way, also Brian Paralektic often uses is the physical reset button that Hillary Clinton carried to Mr. Lavrov back in, when was that, 22, 8, 9? I forgot. The physical or 12. I'm sorry, I forgot. It must have been, it was the second term, right, of Obama. So it must have been 12 or 13. So she carried that to Lavrov, and then they together hit it, and were all smiles, haha, now our relationship's going to be better. And turns out it was just a way of gaining a little bit of time to gear up again, and then 2014 Maidan, and so on and so forth, right, and hit again. Now, what do you make out of this process, that it is so it seems to be incredibly difficult to convince these people that there needs to be a reverse gear, or a change of course, a change of trajectory, or to dislodge them from power, because also it seems that they keep coming back in different guises. I mean, we are seeing it right now with Donald Trump, who's the peace candidate, right? And had all the right talking points, and had all the right momentum, and is now completely subverted, and went into that no reverse gear type of, okay, fine, let's go to war with Iran. Um, why do you think that is?
Yeah. So, in my opinion, or what I have observed, is that I see it like a really long historical process. So that's why I say, well, neocons, I'm not sure. Which at least, like with the Russian Revolution, maybe a little earlier, and with the technological revolutions of steamboats and telegrams and so on, there was like more, how do you say, more an ability for these types of ruling strata with these types of ideas to converge and to interact with each other more, and consolidate their worldview and so on even more, and find more ways also to exploit and so on resources, people, and all of this. So it's a larger historical process, and not only that, one could say, okay, what about the Cold War? Weren't there more people who were like open about dialogue and peace and so on? And yes, that's true. And I would even say that this was exactly because there was so much resistance, contestation, both from without, from like all these socialist countries, and from within. Even there too, there were workers' movement and so on, or movements that were socialist, or even communist. They were really, they had a strong base. So there was a real time of contestation, and thus these ruling strata had to find ways and had to incorporate people to not lose their power, to soften their approach and think of other ways to get back to business, get back to exploiting more again. So it was rather an anomaly. So when the Soviet Union then collapsed, they again saw this window opening to again think about how can we get back to exactly what basically Rubio said, colonialist practices are basically, or almost. How can we get back? And even though in the 1990s, even there were still different factions. Not all were saying, oh, let's expand NATO. There were also those who said, no, let's not expand NATO. And there were in the European side those that said, let's integrate Russia. Let's have more organizations that are about peace and peacemaking, cooperation, and so forth in the 1990s. So these strands existed, but ruling strand, they lost out, yes, and the ruling strand even there is this one that we might call the neocons that said, no, we cannot do this. We cannot neither let Europe be independent, neither can we let Russia become strong again, or even that it exists the way it does. We cannot let this go on even that. So that, and they lost out, yes. It was a gradual process of a political process, a symbolic process, a financial, industrial, but even military kinetic, when Nord Stream was destroyed. Even, I would say, maybe after the financial crisis, there was kind of a reset in the way that we had more technocratic leaders, one could say, that came from banking and finance and so on. And which nowadays is even more, we have more of them. So all of these mechanisms ultimately weeded out or filtered out all these intra-elite, one could say, alternatives. And now we again have these more almost pure form. Even, I mean, it doesn't matter if you listen to liberal transatlantic elites or conservative ones. They all have the same idea that Russia and China are the threats, even if they don't say so. They say, oh, they are strategic competitors. It's the same. So I would say it's a large historical process. And for some reason there, I do not know why, they the strand that is the most violent, let's say, was the one that has won so far. And yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I know thank you. This makes eminently good sense, because the most violent strain is probably also the one that internally is most likely or willing to use dirty methods to get rid of the other ways of trying to organize stuff. And maybe, we have with us, I think, living examples of how this separation then also happened within this strata. I mean, within, let's say, currently the most vocal opponent to how these things works is of course Jeffrey Sachs. And Jeffrey Sachs was part of the very young kind of elite class that then went over, and also was part of the people who structured Russia in a way in the 1990s that then led to a sellout. But he very much turned, and he didn't turn around. I mean, he at some point, he said, like, no, this is the wrong way of approaching it. This is not why we did it. We didn't do this to dismantle Russia. We did this in order to help and to rebuild. And once it was understood that that's not where things are going, they actually started speaking out and saying, no, wait, we need to do this differently. In Germany, we have Ulrike Gero, who once told me in a conversation, that she was the just the last, how did she frame it? The last person who still believed the narrative in a European Union as a force for good and liberty and whatnot. And she sang that song, and she was paraded around as the lead intellectual of the European Union, until she said, like, guys, what you're doing has nothing to do with how we thought the project was working. And then she was dropped like a hot potato, right? And now she's very much part of the intellectual resistance. So in a sense, you see then how the violent strain of this project of dominance then also keeps winning out against the non-conformists and the people who actually want to work together with the rest of the world, not against them. It's quite fascinating that it takes so much time until it crystallizes, right? Until it becomes clear. So is this maybe one of the shimmers of hope that we have at the moment, that at least these, for all the bad things that are happening and all the violence that we now see, at least we get a little bit more clarity about the different camps within the general sociological development?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I try to analyze these things and say, "Oh, why do I even do this?" But
Everybody listening right now is probably wondering that. Why are we even doing this? It's such a depressing affair, but somehow it feels like, if we already like drive this ship, if we sail it into the goddamn iceberg, then I at least want to see the iceberg. I mean, at least that. I at least want to know where it's going. I'm not okay with the goddamn fog. um,
Yeah, yeah. No, no, no. When I ask myself this, I come to the conclusion that I hope at least that maybe if we see a bit clearer, yeah, as you say,
mhm.
if we turn away, not turn away, if we
Blow away the
blow
fog.
away the fog, if we blow away the fog, exactly, and see a bit clearer, maybe we can see either how to see where the weaknesses are and see where we can actually do something and, resist better. Or likewise, if we can't, and if a crisis, I mean, a real crisis happens and people survive, that we know what not to repeat. So I think there are like these two avenues that if we understand what is going on better, then we know better also what not to do, yes, but also what maybe to do right now and what is, for example, what is and what isn't conductive to a solution. Like,
Mm.
I mean, I don't want to be super pessimistic, but for example, voting, I'm not sure that right now voting, at least in Europe, in the US, is super conductive unless the structures of these other party are super how to say, super organized and get on a lot of people that really have the back of this new party, for example. But if such is not the case, then, for example, voting would not be the most, at least like avenue that could change anything right now. So this is why I say, if we see better, we can also understand a little bit better, react better, and maybe find ways to counter and effective ways to counter this, or at least when crisis happens, not to repeat anything of this again.
Then again, unfortunately, the Europeans are like king and queens of repetition. I mean, we even number the goddamn wars, right? It's like just to make sure that we know which one is the next one that we're gonna be starting. Um, but you're absolutely right. Of course, I mean, desperation and desperation is not a strategy. So the the good news though is that I do believe there's more clarity a little bit about the process among others because of this analytical work that you are doing. Can we just in the last 5 or so minutes talk a little bit about what's happening currently with Iran? We have 10 minutes, so um, because you are actually framing it in this longer fight that's being fought, right? And you kind of predicted that the United States would probably not go to a kinetic war, but that wouldn't matter because there are these other ways in which the our dear West is trying to break Iran. Can you explain that a little bit? Like, besides the question whether or not it's going to go kinetic, but what you've been observing.
Hmm. Yes, yes. So what I have observed in the case of Iran, but not only Iran is that
Uh,
the
It's
US are one.
the approach of the bunker state, right? How the
Yeah,
bunker
yeah,
state
yeah.
approaches it. So.
Exactly. Yes, that's good.
The-
A way to frame it. Let's say the approach of, yes, the bunker state, how it is approaching these other countries that they, well, as I said, the goal of this bunker state of the West, so to speak, is not to not to cooperate in any meaningful way with any of these countries like Iran, China, Russia, and others like right now Venezuela, Cuba, and so on. But rather, it's about weakening them as far as possible. I mean, the goal is weakening them so much that then indeed they will cede and make themselves malleable or more receptive of whatever the US elites in particular want for their aims. So in the case of Iran, it's about trying to blockade them. It's about trying to intimidate them. Even the whole talk about diplomacy is, in my opinion, not, unfortunately, not really about it. I mean, in a way, but against the background of
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look real. It looks like a charade to start with if you try to package the demand for a complete military surrender as a diplomatic negotiation. I mean, they're doing it right now in Geneva as we speak on this Friday. But there's very little hope that what the American side is trying to sell as diplomacy is actually meant as such. But then what is the approach? I mean, let's suppose actually that a little miracle happens and it doesn't go kinetic, that something happens and the US doesn't actually fire either directly or through Israel. But so how is the bunker state further approaching this problem of a potential non-compliant entity?
Yes, well, first and foremost, one of the tools is sanctioning the countries, governments, and other entities that could be helpful. Sanctions, but not only that. Also, for example, what has been going on recently with the ships, vessels, etc., that are intercepted with oil. So, trying to also kind of blockade or block oil shipments and what else? What have I and yeah, also trying to destabilize from within. That's also another like avenue, like finding opposition that could somehow destabilize these countries from within. And so all of these try to bleed out in a way these countries. So if you have too many sanctions, then and apart from that, the physical way of trading is also blocked or is there's an attempt to
Impeded,
block
yeah.
them, yes, impede them, and so on. Then you will have less and less or more and more problems within your own population of such a country. And if they are also then these attempts maybe at sabotage or other types of acts like these within these countries. So all these things are there to create destabilization and also to stop the further industrial development or military development of these countries, and also so not see them only as isolated countries, but as links or nodes between all the other countries that are kind of in this multipolar development, or if one can call it that. So, and then it's I also think it's about looking, okay, what is possible, and what can we do right now? And also it's about not stopping. So it's not like, oh, we will now start to sanction Iran, or we will now start to impede that Iran trades with other countries, or so on and so forth. Or we will now lead a sabotage campaign and one of civil unrest. No, and then it will stop. No, it's about continuously doing this with low resources, or not with so much resources, to create these, how do you say, incessant instability. Also, another factor I would say is like creating credible scenarios of a threat, yes, military threat too. Now, does it mean I can't say if they will or won't attack, but either way, if they create such scenarios that are credible for the other party, then this also means that they will have to constantly be on the lookout and constantly use resources and so on and so forth. So all of this is an attempt to weaken. And yes, I would say this is also warfare. It is what they call hybrid gray zone
Yeah.
warfare. It is.
Yeah, the
So
funny thing is that they accuse everybody else of doing that against them when they are obviously the queen and kingpins of the approach, implementing this for half a century or more. Kind of a war, a non-kinetic war of attrition, with actually a lot of people dying. I will next week, if everything goes right, I will interview one of the researchers on the recent Lancet study that figured out, they put the number of annual deaths from US and EU sanctions. US and EU sanctions. Annual deaths between 1971 and 2021, 500,000 people per year. That died of sanctions, like related with the economy, related especially with health, right? That these countries like Iran can then not even properly import medicine and stuff and so on. And even if they could not pay for it because they're cut off and so on. I mean, it's a horrible instrument of bringing death and destruction, but it's very much in line, and it's even popular in countries like Switzerland. Sanctions are popular. It's because it's a way to punish the baddies. And this is fascinating, that, I mean, it's horrible, it's despicable, but it is fascinating that it works to that people, again, in the name of doing something good, then end up bringing death and despair to much of the rest of the world.
Yes. And as I say, trying to legitimize, like trying to find a way to say this is justified because the other countries are evil, basically.
Yeah, and we just want to help, right? We're coming and bringing you sanctions to help and elevate your women and girls into schools and empower them, and free you from a horrible regime of repression. So it's very sick and perverted, but you can see how you need to dress the devil in an angel's costume in order for it to go down, because people don't want to be bad. They want to be good, actually. So you need to dress stuff in properly. It's just kind of sick.
Exactly, and this is what's happening.
Let's end on a positive note. Nell, give me one positive, optimistic take from your analysis of what we can do.
Okay. Yeah, there are ways. So I would say what we can do is, again, as I said before, or as I always say, whatever the type of, let's say, resistance or kind of things we can do need to be sort of is not based on one country, but transnationally. This is one avenue. The other one is, of course, first of all, becoming aware and aware what is happening and how these people think and why, because then we can know, okay, how what we should not do or in what we should not engage in. So the other thing is what I say also, or what I write, is that all of these projects, like elite projects or whatever, are based on social practices. So this means that we ourselves need to also engage in social practices to create spaces, experiences, our own biographies, everything that is different and alternative from this, which is happening and which we don't want, which is based on ours should be based on peace, cooperation, and all of these things, common good. And we need to think about these alternatives and build them right now, and also, again, create these spaces in the material world so that people also see that there are others that think like this. And again, what I think is like really, really important, but I don't know, I think this is a process, a collective process, is exactly think about how to create alternative institutions and ways of organizing society right now. How that's a collective process. That's why we also need to create these collective meetings, not only between like us as citizens, but also if there are all these other dissenters that where diplomats or whatnot, they should also do this. I mean, they do probably, but I mean, everybody needs to do it. So
I had an interesting talk a few weeks ago with a diplomat. I'm not going to say where or who or what, but he's from a global south country, and he told me that It's interesting how diplomats from the West can talk to you about things that, in your perspective, are clearly a colonial mindset, right? But you just let them politely talk in order to keep listening to how they work, and you go and nod and drink tea and go and nod along. So, in a sense, I mean, I don't know if this is a hopeful thing, but the one hope that I have is that there's a lot of people in the world out there who actually understand from the global south, but also within our societies. And there's a time to go along and nod, and there will be a time to speak up and say, like, you know what? Maybe not everybody's sharing your perception on this one. Maybe what we need is not deterrence. Maybe what we need is friendship. Maybe we try to change the approach, my dear friends. And at some point, we might even get there. Now, thank you very much. This was again a very fascinating talk. I'm very much at all with your ability to connect the arch of development of history to the particular. And I hope you will continue to analyze and to publish. People who want to find you should first and foremost go, of course, to your Substack. Again, that's Worldliness on Worldliness on Substack, and then subscribe to you so that they get your emails. Is there another place where people should go to find you?
Yes, yes. I also write for Nachdenkseiten, if anybody speaks German. Nachdenkseiten. And other than that, I'm on X, Blue Sky. Yeah.
Okay, they will find you there. Nell Bonilla, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.